All right, good afternoon and welcome to today's virtual design review panel. Today on our agenda, we have a development proposal for 1284 Main Street East in Hamilton. I'm Edward Winter, the host of this meeting, and David Cluzio will be chairing this meeting. In addition to our panel members, we have the applicant team, city staff, members of the public, and media observing this meeting. Members of the public are welcome here to observe the meeting only today. This session will be recorded and will be uploaded to the City of Hamilton's Design Review Panel webpage. Lastly, a reminder to panelists, we do have a full table here, so please keep your microphones muted while not speaking. Thank you everyone for attending our Design Review Panel. David, please begin when you're ready.
Can you confirm, Edward, that this session is being recorded?
Yes, we are.
And are there any changes to the agenda today?
No, there are not.
Okay. I assume by silence that there's no conflict of interest with any of the panel members in attendance. Okay, then on the agenda, as already said, today is the review of 1284 Main Street East. The lead planner on the file is Daniel Barnett. Good afternoon, Daniel. We're ready for your presentation. Please keep the presentation to under 10 minutes.
Sorry, can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Good afternoon, members of the Design Review Panel. The proposed development is for the lands at 1284 Main Street East, located on the south side of Main Street, between Graham Avenue South and Wexford Avenue South. The proposal is for a multi-building residential development, including the adaptive reuse of the original building for 87 units, redevelopment of the remaining site for residential buildings, including 2 3-story townhouses at the rear, as well as 2 4-story stacked townhouses along Graham and Wexford, as well as to establish 3 14-story multiple dwellings for a combined total of 975 dwelling units. This is the subject property, the old Delta High School, and the area includes the surrounding area includes commercial and some residential developments along Main Street, low-rise commercial developments, I should specify, as well as low-rise, low-density single-family dwellings along both Wexford, Maple, and Graham. And then just to further add, low-density, low-rise developments are predominant in this area. Very little mid-rise or high-rise developments in the immediate area. This is a view of the subject property as seen from Main Street East looking south. This is a view of the subject land as seen from Graham East. This is a view of the subject land seen from Maple looking north. This is a view of the subject land as seen from Wexford Avenue South looking west. So this is a view of the existing commercial and residential developments along Main Street to the west of the subject property, as seen from the intersection of Main Street and Graham Avenue South, looking west. This is a view of the existing and low-rise commercial developments located on the north side of Main Street, located to the north of the subject property. This is seen from the intersection of Main Street East and Graham Avenue South, looking east. This is additional commercial developments located on the north side of Main Street East, again looking east. This is the existing developments located along Main Street, located to the east of the subject property, east of the intersection of Main Street East and Westford Avenue South, looking east against low-rise commercial developments. This is a view of the existing one-story single detached dwellings located on the west side of Graham Avenue South, as seen from Graham Avenue South looking southwest. This is the existing one to two story development, single-family dwellings located on the south side of Maple, so located to the south of the subject property, seen from Maple looking southeast. This is a view of the existing 2 to 2.5 story single detached dwellings located on the east side of Wexford Avenue South, located to the east of the subject property, as seen from Wexford Avenue looking northeast. So this is the site plan drawing was provided, including the building they intend to adaptively reuse, the two four-story stacked townhouses located on the east and west sides of the property, the 3-story townhouses located in the south, and then the three 14-story buildings located in the center of the site. This is the ground floor plan proposed development. This is kind of typical underground parking level that was provided with material. So they will not be providing parking underneath, obviously, the building they're intending to adaptively reuse. So this is the east elevation. This is the view from Wexford Avenue. This is the southerly elevation, so from Maple Avenue. This is the west elevation, so this would be from Graham Avenue. This is the north elevation seen from Main Street. This is an overhead rendering west perspective looking southeast. This is a rendering from the northwest perspective at the corner of Graham. From the southwest perspective from Graham and Maple. A rendering of the southeast perspective looking northwest, so this would be at Maple and Wexford. This is the rendering of the courtyard looking northwest. Just to note, the sun shadow, there was a sun shadow study provided with the application, and during the spring and fall equinox, this courtyard seemed to be pretty much in shade for much of the day, pretty much predominantly in shade. This is the urbanist Schedule E, what the property is identified as both neighborhoods as well as primary corridor and priority transit corridor in the Urban Hamilton official plan. Is designated both neighborhoods as well as mixed-use medium density in the City of Hamilton, Urban Hamilton official plan. In terms of major policy themes, the primary corridors and neighborhoods on Schedule E. Primary corridors shall serve as a link between two or more nodes, major activity centers, or employment areas. Urban corridors shall function as commercial spines, providing retail and commercial services that cater primarily to the weekly and daily needs of residents in the area. Primary corridors shall be served by higher order transit. Built form and urban corridors shall generally consist of low to mid-rise forms, but will vary along the length of the corridor, some areas permitting to accommodate high density and high rise forms. Urban corridors should generally be focused for intensification throughout the neighborhood which they traverse. Neighborhoods shall primarily consist of residential uses and complementary facilities and services intended to serve residents. Neighborhoods elements of the urban structure shall permit and provide opportunities for a full range of housing forms, types, tenures, and including affordable housing with supports. In terms of neighborhoods, designation, residential dwellings are permitted for lands designated neighborhoods. Uses permitted for high density residential areas include multiple dwellings. The existing character of established neighborhoods shall be maintained. Residential intensification in these areas shall enhance and be compatible with the scale and character of existing residential neighborhoods. Multiple dwellings, 12 stories or greater, shall not generally be permitted adjacent to low-profile residential uses. A separation distance shall generally be maybe form of suitable intervening land uses where separation cannot be achieved. Transitional features such as progressively stepping building step backs or other design features shall be incorporated into the design. Development shall not unduly overshadow or block light on adjacent sensitive land uses, the public realm, or outdoor private amenity areas. The orientation, design, and massing of a building or structure 12 stories or greater shall take into account the impact of public view corridors and general public views on the area of the Niagara Escarpment, as well as cultural heritage resources and cultural heritage landscapes. In terms of mixed-use medium density, a multiple dwelling is use permitted for lands designated mixed-use medium density. Lands designated mixed-use medium density should contain a range of densities and building heights to a maximum of 6 stories. However, additional height up to 12 stories may be permitted without an amendment to the official plan, provided the applicant demonstrates both that the proposed development for a mix of unit sizes to accommodate a range of housing sizes and income levels. Development shall incorporate sustainable building and design principles, no adverse shadow impacts created on existing residential uses within adjacent lands, designated neighborhoods. Buildings are progressively stepped back from the adjacent areas, designated neighborhoods. And then zoning may include an angular plane requirement to set out an appropriate transition and step back height. That buildings are stepped back from the street to minimize height appearance from the street.
Are you close to the end of your thing, Daniel? Because you're running out of time.
Getting there. Yes, a new development should be designated and oriented toward create comfortable, vibrant, and stimulating pedestrian-oriented streets. Where areas in those areas designated medium density, new development shall respect the existing built form of adjacent neighborhoods by providing a gradation in building heights and densities. The orientation, design, and massing of buildings and structures, again, in this case, higher than 6 stories shall accommodate the take into consideration the views of the Niagara Escarpment, cultural heritage resources, and cultural heritage landscapes. Residential intensification policies, compatible integration with the development of the surrounding area in terms of use, scale, form, and character, compatibility with adjacent land uses, including matters such as shadowing, overlook, lighting, traffic effects, relations of the building with massing, height, massing, and scale, consideration of transition and height and densities to adjacent buildings, that ensure new developments are compatible and enhance the character of the existing environment and locale, respecting existing character, pattern, development, built form, and landscape, recognizing and protecting cultural heritage history, conserving existing built heritage features in the city and its communities, organizing spaces in a logical manner through the design, placement, and construction of building, streets, and structures, and landscaping, existing massing patterns, rhyme, character, color, and surrounding context. We'll go through all these. New development should be mass respect the existing and planned street proportions, create transition, avoid shadowing, avoid wind conditions. Development shall define the street through consistent setbacks and create a comfortable pedestrian environment mechanisms. So the zoning of the property identified as I2, the surrounding areas predominantly some talk one zone along the main, but the rest of the area is kind of small scale residential or zoning. Quickly going through the zoning, it's I2 zone. I2 zone does not permit a multi-dwelling, so they do have to go through a rezoning process, which they have applied for. Maximum height currently in the I2 zone is 10.5 meters. They're going to require approximately 621 parking spaces based on their unit breakdown and providing an excess of that. Typically, a minimum amenity space is required based on the unit breakdown, approximately 4,800 square meters of amenity space. Specific areas of discussion: does the proposal conserve and respect the existing built heritage features of the area? Does the proposal represent a compatible integration with the surrounding area in terms of use, scale, form, and character? And does the proposal organize the space in a logical manner? Design, placement, and construction of new buildings, placement and construction of new buildings, streets, structures, and landscaping. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Daniel. We're ready for the consultant to provide additional information. So if you could keep your presentation to under 10 minutes as well. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Arcadius GNC will bring up the slide deck. So good afternoon, panel, and thank you for the opportunity to present our proposal to you. I am glad that we provided our slide deck to you in advance so you could have a chance to visualize our presentation as now we speed through these next 44 slides for you all. Slide 2 is an aerial image of the site, the former Delta Secondary School, which closed in 2019, and the site is almost 2.5 hectares in size. The current site configuration has numerous vehicular and pedestrian access points along the north, west, south, and east lot lines, as the site directly abuts 3 local and 1 major arterial road. And these access points facilitated the pedestrian, car, and bus traffic to the school site. The majority of the site currently is impermeable, with the existing 3-phased building in some areas built to the lot line, surface parking, and asphalt amenity. Slide 3 has figures pulled from my PGR indicating the site's prominent location and how the proposal will support the significant transit investment planned for the Main Street East corridor. On the left side is Schedule 5 in the Provincial Growth Plan, with the site highlighted along the priority transit corridor, and the detailed figure on the right illustrates the 2 MTSA locations, both less than 500 meters to the site along the proposed LRT transit line. Slide 4 are figures in the official plan that we'll skip over. Daniel spoke to those. Slide 5, lastly, for context, I wanted to touch upon this figure from White House, which shows the prime location of the site and its proximity to commercial along the Main Street East spine, Eastgate Mall to the east at the terminus of the future LRT, and the center on Barton, another commercial area 1.5 kilometers north. 9 schools are located within 2.5 kilometers, 4 within a kilometer, 7 parks and additional recreational facilities under 2 kilometers away, 5 of those within 900 meters. So you'll now hear from the other consultants and can tease out of their presentation the key elements relating to increasing green space on the site, providing amenity area and bicycle parking in excess of what is required within the zoning bylaw, falling under angular planes and providing respectful and compatible design considerations, which are not the same as, to the proximal residential homes, and retreating the new built form posterior to the adaptively reused heritage building as a prominent feature, which ERA will now speak to. Thank you.
Next slide, Arcadius. Thanks, Sarah. The original school building was constructed in 1923 to 24 by Hutton and Souder architects, with later additions by Prack and Prack and Moffett and Kinoshita. The modern Gothic structure, with its 5-story central tower, is sited within generous side and front yards observable from Main Street East. The building was designated under the Ontario Heritage Act in 2014 and permanently closed as a school in 2019. Slide, Arcadius. So early on in the design process, ERA developed a series of conservation design parameters, which are heritage-driven urban design directives that are intended to guide the conservation strategy for the site, as well as respond to this site's urban context and the higher level planning goals for the project. The first parameter is to highlight the retained original school building. New buildings should be sited in response to the school's historic evolution over time. New massing should respond to and respect to the historic building as well as the surrounding neighborhood. New construction should draw on a sympathetic material palette. And finally, a meaningful contribution should be made to the public realm through landscaping and adaptive reuse.
Thank you, Casper. I will begin this portion of the presentation with a series of diagrams to explain our design process for the site. As per the Conservation and Heritage Guidelines, we retained the original 1924 building, providing the area for redevelopment. We also retained the existing open spaces fronting the Main Street. Additional open spaces is proposed on the southeast and southwest corners. At the perimeter of the property, as a response to the scale of the neighborhood, we proposed a low-rise neighborhood scale built form. Then central open space would be used as a focal point of the site's organization. The open space and perimeter built form give direction for pedestrian permeability throughout the site. Vehicular access to be provided from Maple Avenue and create an internal Warner Street. The design of the built form massing begins with the retained heritage building. Further buildings add 2 stories, stepping back at levels 3 and 4 to define the street edge. And now, internally, the organization of the built form along the heritage facade frames the internal courtyard and reinforces the pedestrian routes. This creates a 4-story base that establishes a continuous datum through the site, aligning with the existing heritage structure. Then the mid-rise components extend from that internal base. All built form is within the angular planes taken from the immediate context. And residential visitor parking is provided within 3 levels of underground parking. This is the ground floor. We show how the main programmatic portions are organized. Yellow are the lobbies and circulation, blue are the residential units, pink is the indoor amenity, and then green is the outdoor amenity. Starting at the bottom of the plan, we propose townhouses with main entrances from Maple Avenue and parking from their internal Woonerf. Along Graham and Wexford Avenue are stacked townhouses with grade level units opening onto the surrounding streets and walkways. The retained heritage building will be retrofitted as a residential use and connect to the mid-rise buildings. The amenity space and lobbies are connected to the central open space and internal Wooner Street. The mid-rise lobby to the south and the perimeter stacked townhouse lobbies would be open to both sides to allow for physical and visual connectivity. Now on the second floor, we retain the existing school auditorium's indoor amenity. Entry to the heritage building is provided throughout its existing access from Main Street and from proposed mid-rise buildings. Third floor, fifth floor. The fifth floor is where the mid-rise building mass shifts from the base buildings, and this will be a typical mid-rise floors from level 6 to 13. And then the top residential floor are to be stepped back from the building face, creating terraces on their outer edges. The building would end with a rooftop amenity adjacent to the mechanical penthouse, both further step back from the building edge. And these diagrams show how the elevation concept was driven by the neighborhood and heritage context. Starting from the top left, the low-rise buildings are to resemble a more traditional elevation pattern with a dense grid of windows separated by masonry. The perimeter building elevations is divided into smaller volumes inspired by the surrounding context. The lower diagrams show that the buildings internal to the site would use a similar architectural language, but slightly simplified. These diagrams show how we use the architectural elements of the existing heritage building as inspiration for the elevation concept of the mid-rise, and with that aiming to deliver a distinct contemporary design, but still rooted in history. And with using these heritage elements arranged in different rhythms that would allow us to break up the massing of the mid-rise into smaller volumes. And then resulting elevation, we see the scale of the heritage building is reflected in the first 4 floors throughout the entire site. We see the use of varying materials to further enhance the separation of the volumes and the elevations. And the floors above are clearly separated from the base and are visually distinct. And the variation of that grid above combined with the step back floors break up the massing. And looking from Main Street, the proposed buildings are secondary, acting more as a backdrop to the heritage building elevation. As for the proposed materials, they are varied in color and texture. We'd use smooth precast concrete and glass for the mid-rise buildings, then red and brown masonry for the base and perimeter buildings, gray and light gray as secondary materials with wood panels as accents. Now here we see the overall view looking southeast of the proposed development, showing the base building scale and materiality as an extension of the heritage building. And we see the mid-rise with light frame grids above that building base.
I think you're running out of time here. I hope you're close to the end here.
Okay, we're close to the end, so thank you for that. I'll just speed through this portion. View along Graham Avenue looking south. We see the stacked townhouse in front of the mid-rise in the back. View along Maple Avenue looking east. View of the internal courtyard, and where we see the Woonarf Street with the Heritage Building framing the central open space. An overall view. And the view from the corner of the retained landscape open space at Main Street, looking into the internal walkway on the side, showing the scale of and the materiality of the heritage building extending throughout the site. And a view along the internal Woonarf Street with clearly defined pedestrian realm. And this is our site plan summary with statistics for additional detail. And with that, I would like to hand it over to Leanne. Thank you.
Thank you, Arcadius. David, I need 2 minutes or less, I promise. Next slide, please, Arcadius. So this slide illustrates the overall landscape concept for the proposed development. The sketches on the left of the slide provide a quick visual of the existing versus proposed green soft space on the site, with an increase of approximately 600 square meters. That excludes permeable hard surfaces that are on the site that help with stormwater management. There's also 2 rain gardens proposed that offer both beauty and functionality on the site. At the Main Street frontage, we've tried to tread lightly with an approach that preserves the open park-like feel while intervening slightly with selective removal of dead or dying trees and other materials such as the vine that's creeping along the front of the heritage building facade. The southern portion of the site is designed to recall the Beaux Arts landscape style that's noted in the heritage designation. This style is characterized by formal geometry, garden rooms, linear alleys, hedges, and focal points. Some of the key features in here are the central courtyard, which offers residents with outdoor amenity space that's connected to the indoor amenity space, organized around a central walkway, which aligns with the U-shaped formal entrance at the front of the school that was identified in the heritage designation. There's courtyards that were identified in heritage as well as the preserved arch canopy at Graham and Wexford. That corner is improved into a publicly accessible park space, as well as a replica arch and park space over at the other corner at Wexford. Next slide, please, Arcadius. The previous slide shows building facades with the elevations. These ones illustrate the feel that we'll find on the Main Street, and Graham is the visual, but we'll also see this on Wexford. Our goal is to maintain as many existing trees as possible. However, at this conceptual stage, we don't really know exactly how many, but of course we'll be working with the city and following their guidelines for the number of trees that need to be planted. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. I'll turn it over to the panel members for questions, and the first one is Dean.
Hi, Daniel and GNC Architects. Thank you for your presentation. My first question, or my only question, I guess, is to Daniel. Could you remind me what the height is, the minimum height is for what is considered a tall building under the guidelines?
So in terms of, Chair, tall building, generally speaking, is 44 meters or less in height. That's how at least the downtown differentiates between a tall building and a mid-rise building is.
That's not defined in stories, number of stories.
Well, in the downtown, mid-rise is like 12 stories or less, but there have been buildings that have still been considered mid-rise that have been 13 or 14 stories, but have still been under that 44-meter height.
Okay, thank you.
Joey.
Thanks, David. I have a couple of heritage-related questions. First one is the entire property is designated, which we know is the highest protection for a building within the province. Just wondering how it was concluded that only the northern portion was worth saving.
Hi, Joey. I can speak to this. I'm Sam from here with Casper. So, I mean, obviously, there's a designation bylaw that covers this property. and it's extremely detailed and very extensive. And we explored a number of ways to deploy additional density across the site by keeping more of the buildings, including the Prac and Prac additions and the rear addition by Moffat and Partners. And ultimately, what that created was either a scenario where we had to build over top of the front portion of the building related to the principal facade on Main Street, or where we had to push everything far to the rear and everything got very, very tall. And of course, the other example where we build on top of the existing Prac and Prac buildings had kind of the same issue. Everything got very, very tall. So in order to balance all of the different objectives on this site, to keep the sides of the site relatively low and related to the neighborhood scale, and to retain the integrity and legibility of the more decorated and architecturally significant portion of the building, we decided that it was acceptable to, as a strategy, consider the removal of the remaining portions of the building, the additions. When you look at the designation bylaw, a lot of the architectural and design attributes and significance is related to the building in the front. And so that's why that decision was taken.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I mean, I asked that because I did notice in the cultural heritage impact assessment that there were a number of schemes that included the entire building intact. And I did see that there was more, obviously, density packed onto the back there. But you know, what were the reasons why one of those options weren't selected over the current one?
It was mostly a balancing of objectives for the site. So, you know, I think Sarah Knoll can speak to this, but there are different, different parameters that we were working with from a planning perspective and from an urban design perspective. And when we looked at the project as a whole and what it was achieving, it felt like increasing the size and the height of the buildings in other locations didn't achieve the right balance for the entire site. And of course, the landscape objectives too, which we thought should be prioritized for the neighborhood.
Right. If there was a reduction in density and in number of units, then would the options to keeping the entire building intact become more viable?
I mean,
that's not for you, Sam.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I could speak to that, but I'll leave that to the consideration of others.
Anyone speak to that?
I can't fully speak to that, but I can say that the structural integrity and the idea of where the underground parking is, I don't know how that affects the retention of any of the existing buildings on site. I can say that the design parameters wasn't offside from direction that ERA provided as the heritage consultants, and that was taken into consideration in their directives were incorporated into the proposal. So it wasn't one side leading the other. It was a.
I understand that, but my question is, and I don't think this is a heritage related question. My question is, if the density was reduced on the site, would the option to retain the majority or all of the building become a more viable option?
Joey, I'll speak to all of the building piece. And respecting the fact that the designation bylaw kind of covers everything.
Right.
There are, I think, clear areas of priority when you actually look at this site and the structures on the site. Some have far greater design value than others, I think, objectively. And so I don't think that the best outcome would be served by retaining all of these buildings necessarily.
Okay, let's look at this different. Okay, fair enough. From a heritage perspective, I know that's boilerplate now. That's how heritage is approached. That's fine. How about in the perspective of the climate crisis that we're in? Maybe this, again, not a heritage question. Maybe this is a question for the architects or for the developer or for the planner.
I think these are pretty leading questions, Joey.
They're loaded, and we don't have enough time.
And
right,
I don't think we have enough time. I think the answers that you're seeking are kind of self-evident. So Let's if you have other questions, Joey.
Nope, that's it. That's it for me. Thank you.
Sorry, Jennifer.
I have one question. It's noted that the units are apartment units. Can you clarify whether they're rental or condo? Or is that determined at this point?
I don't have the determination. I believe it's leaning towards condo, but I don't, my PGR doesn't speak to tenure, and I'm not sure it's been officially determined unless we have someone from the ownership group here to speak to that definitively, but I don't believe it's official.
Okay, I have no further questions. No.
Eldon.
Thank you. Just a couple questions of clarification. In the presentation, I think, Leanne, you mentioned that there was an increase in overall, I guess, softscape or open space on the site. And I just want to make sure I got it right. You said 600 square meters?
In green space, that's correct.
In green space, net increase.
Yeah, so there's more green space now because of you may recall Sarah mentioned in one of her early slides in the presentation that the site's quite impermeable right now with the rooftop of the existing buildings, and then there's a lot of asphalt parking and some walkways. So this is breaking it down a little bit, and actually we're able to provide a bit more soft green surface. And then in addition to that, that Woonerf Road, and for anybody who isn't familiar with that term, I know a lot of us are, but many aren't, is it's basically a shared use road where pedestrians and bicycle traffic and cars can all access that route. And it just has look and feel of pedestrian only, but slow moving vehicles can move there too. Anyway, that is all proposed to be permeable as well, so that we can really increase the infiltration of stormwater through and manage it on site.
And just for clarity, in terms of the infiltration, there is underground parking under the entirety of the site, right?
Well, not under the entire site. The front, basically kind of like that top third is not, just the more southern 2/3 where there's development. Underneath that, yes, but we can still use permeable pavers to pull water down and then push it to, we have two rain gardens on site as well. We've been working closely with the civil. At this stage, even though it's still conceptual, we like to try to work with them pretty early on so we can incorporate some of those key LID techniques very early on to make sure that it's actually going to work.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. And one last question. It was hard for me to determine the actual height in meters of the 14-story components. Does anyone have that number from your team?
It is the 44 meters.
Okay, so it is the 44.
That's right.
And then the last question, I just wanted clarity because it seemed that there was a discrepancy between the numbers, the separation distances in the urban design brief and what I viewed on the plans. If you could just help to confirm what the separation is between buildings A, B, and C, and D and E.
That may be for Arcadius to quickly pull up. I'm going to try to flip to the site plan and see if I can.
Or maybe more, maybe to kind of help us along with the I can't remember what package it was called, but yes, I'm looking at this plan. So would this be the most current plan we can rely on?
Correct.
The one with there's no plan number, but yeah. Oh, sorry, A103.
Well, could you articulate what is the dimension between A and C? What is, and I guess it's the same dimension between B and C. Can you identify what that is?
If any of the consultants can jump on really quickly to find that number.
I'm just scrolling through a larger version on my screen. So just bear with me one moment so I can blow.
You know what? We can keep going here. You can fill that in as when when you find it, you can just interrupt the.
Yeah, thank you. Those are my questions. Thank you for the responses.
Hoda.
Thank you. My questions has been answered. Thanks.
Okay, I have two questions. One is there any sustainability initiative that you have identified or that you're pursuing or you can elaborate on in this project?
Thanks, David, and if anyone else wants to jump in behind me as well. There are quite a few that are being contemplated and being proposed for the site. There is, as you know, the adaptive reuse of the building, and also any materiality that are in the sections that are for removal can be incorporated into the design as well. There is the geothermal system that is being proposed on the site, as well as the rain gardens that Leanne spoke to, permeable pavers that Leanne spoke to as well, and then EV rough-ins as well.
I have a minor heritage question. I noticed in the description that the southwest corner of the site, there's an existing archway, and it sounds like it's part of the strategy in heritage response to keep that.
That's correct.
How significant as part of the heritage, like in your priority, like how significant is that seen within this context of your, you had a priority of elements that you were hanging on to or advocating for the main school to be a high priority. Where does that fit within that?
I think, ERA could speak to the ranking because they prepared that. In the arch itself, I think speaks more to the community identifying with that arch as a landmark in the community, and not necessarily tied to the Beaux-Arts era in the timing of its installation or anything like that. But out of recognition of its significance in the community, there was a decision to maintain it if at all possible. And so far we've worked that in and then replicated that on the other side. It works nicely that Beaux-Arts landscape style works with the formal geometry, archways, vistas, alleys, features within the landscape. So it just kind of dovetails nicely into us being able to preserve that, even though it in itself is minimal heritage value, but really roll it into the overall theme, which does have the heritage value to it.
That's right, Leanne. I think you put it really well. It's mostly about the kind of present day attribution of value that we understand the community to value that as a resource rather than it having any particular design value from a heritage perspective.
Okay, thank you for your answers. I'm going to turn it
David,
over to the panelists.
Sorry, David, if I don't jump in for Eldon's question, it looks like it's 12.5 meters from C to A and B.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sarah. Appreciate it. And nice to see you, by the way.
Okay. Then I'm going to turn it over to the panelists for commentary. So the first is Dana.
Hi. I just want to say thank you to everyone for the presentation. It looks like a tremendous amount of work has been put into this project, and I'm excited to see some adaptive reuse of a heritage building and intensification in, an urban area, but an area that's so close to transit. And I think we all know that we're really in need of housing. So it's really exciting to see the effort and the work that you've put into this from a heritage perspective and from a design perspective. I think the proposal is really strong as it looks at the context and how this proposal fits in with the surrounding area, all in terms of the elevations, the massing, as well as the attention to design detail. Some of my concerns are kind of around the massing and the orientation of towers A, B, and C internal to the proposal. So really not how it interacts with the context, but basically how the site is organized internally. And my concern is with like the distance, the separation distance between towers A and B and C, like that 12.5 meters is about half of what is typical for tower separation on site. My thoughts would be that you guys could go taller with more slender floor plates, and then what you would end up with is less shadowing on the internal courtyard, and less wind conditions on those exterior parquets. So I would explore like maybe moving the massing to maybe a more slender tower with less impact on the amenity space internal to the site. My other concerns are kind of with pedestrian connection and sidewalks, just ensuring that you have a really direct connection from Main Street to Maple Street through the site, and that those connections aren't impeded by either buildings or other functions on the site, and that there's a direct pathway between that. And lastly, just around the WUNRF, I love the idea of having kind of a shared car and vehicular space, but maybe ensure that you have curbing or you don't have a flush curb, because what I've seen happen in the past is, delivery drivers will use that as space just to park their car. So just be cognizant of how that's designed as you move forward. That's all my comments.
I've lost my list of who's next. Hold on a sec here. What did I do with that?
I think I'm next, David.
Yes, you are.
Thank you. Thanks to Daniel and Sarah and Sam and Casper and team at GNC, and also Leanne for their presentation. I agree with Dana. I think it's nice to see a project that really does consider the existing building and the existing landscape, and to treat it, at least a portion of it, in a sensitive way. The aerials in the CHIA show this sort of wonderful trajectory of incremental growth of the building, where each subsequent addition respects and is sensitively inserted into the property. It also shows how the initial 1924 building influenced the design through selection of materials and details, particularly the consistency of the limestone throughout. What I'm not seeing with this proposal is that it removes a significant part of that story rather than supporting it. And I understand how these things work. There's very sort of, heavy requirements in place, and a balance, or as balanced as possible, of a design comes out of it. And I appreciate that process. I don't think that the trajectory of the building is capable of being properly considered because of the extensive amount of density proposed. With that density reduced, I think there's a richer project here that encompasses a fuller history of the site while still meeting project requirements. Additionally, and in consideration of inherent sustainability at the site, we should look more towards design that keeps as much of the existing as possible. And I think this is achievable. The new footprints for the project follow ones that are removed. And I think that the existing ones can be retained with new units added. Thank you.
Jennifer.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for your presentations. I think there's a common theme coming in from all of our panelists here, concern about density. And certainly I support density, particularly in light of the City of Hamilton's commitment to maintain farmland and densify where we can in the city. So I fully support building this site to its logical, comfortable maximum, but I think we're all feeling that it exceeds the maximum a little bit, and to the detriment of living conditions, and particularly the separation of towers. So at 44 meters high, they are tall buildings, and the separation is half of what we would typically want to see with a tall building. So, seeing people just, from balcony to balcony, it's a privacy issue. I think it's a livability issue. And from that, then you're reducing, sunlight in the main courtyard, which was one of the things that the city staff mentioned as a concern. I think that courtyard will be in shadow most of the time. We, as a panel, we met earlier. We discussed a couple of ways in which density could be redistributed or reduced on site. I think you've respected the angular plane geometry, which is great, but I don't know if that angular plane geometry allows maybe 1 story higher on the surrounding towns in order that you could decrease the density and increase the separation of the towers. Also, we noticed in the perspective views, even the separation between towers is obliterated once you're completely off access. So the volume at the top seems like one large volume instead of separate volumes. So I think experientially it will feel heavier than the series of towers that it's broken into. Those are all my concerns at this point.
Eldon.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your presentation. I agree with a lot of the points of my colleagues, and I do want to say I think this is a very exciting proposal, and any opportunity to adaptively reuse and maintain an existing school, especially schools in Hamilton that have such great quality and character as almost a centerpiece of a redevelopment, is something to be championed. I echo some of Dana's comments as it relates to the massing of the proposal. When you look at it, in particular from the renderings, it looks like a column going straight up. It doesn't go into the sky delicately. It goes in heavy, and it sticks out in a way that brings attention to the fact that perhaps a different approach on density should be explored. Whether it's combining buildings and spreading out that density to reduce that height, or maybe looking at more slender towers, as Dana had suggested. I think those may be better approaches, because it's starting to read almost as an institutional hospital style massing. On the open space component, I appreciated the kind of the clarification on the increase. I felt as if more should have been provided, given the amount of density that's in this area and given the limited amount of other open spaces opportunities within walking distance of the site, that there's an opportunity that what's considered currently private amenity in the site could be expanded and opened up. There is a feeling on this site that it is very, at least from my perspective, it's an enclave, and it needs to be opened up. There needs to be greater porosity and interconnection with the greater community. The other item that I would just add is that I felt that the treatment of the facades along the exterior streets had greater interest and variety than what was being proposed internally within the Warner. And I thought that was strange, and I almost felt like that should have been flipped. A little more, grace and reserve on the exterior, and a little more excitement and change, because you have that flexibility internally within the space that you're defining. I think that's maybe an opportunity you may want to consider. Because right now I appreciate the renderings, and I think the Warner system is great. But it seems like there's a lack of rhythm and articulation and diversity within that space in comparison to walking along the public streets. So something to think about. And again, really excited for this proposal. Can't wait to see what happens with it next. Thank you.
Okay, Hoda.
I also thank you for the presentation, and I found this proposal very strong, and it was a good try to have all the aspects, the heritage, and the environmental side of that. I appreciate the rain gardens and all the water management techniques that is going to be used in this project, and also I support the density. I just have I would like to echo my colleagues' comments about the orientation of the towers and the relationship between them. My main comment is about again the same comment that Eldon said about green spaces and opening up the site to the neighborhood. At the north side, it's all the same as before. It's clear and have open space, open green space toward the main street. But at the south side, it used to be much open, and for the residents, for the existing neighborhood, it's better to have this new proposal as a part neighborhood, not something that keeping the nice courtyard just for this complex. And I like keeping the existing pergola as a sign that that the existing residents feel that okay, there are some signs that the same, but I feel that approach, because of the orientation of the buildings inside the site, is not opening up. That's like the entrance to the site, but the view is not open. It's better to have the nice entrance to expose the nice courtyard for the rest of the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. So I guess I have some commentary as well. I would echo some of the earlier comments about how the obvious retention of the original heritage school, including the auditorium as well as the forecourt along Main Street is really commendable, and I think it'll retain a rich part of the fabric of the city. I also commend the use of the geothermal as part of the sustainability initiative, and I support the relaxation of the setback requirements along Main Street to allow the retention of that obvious amenity that's associated with the Heritage School, the front landscaping. Typically, when we're looking at projects of this kind of scale in terms of the scope of increase of 900 plus residential units, we're looking also for some kind of amenity that we give back to the city, whether it be retail or some other kind of components at the street level that add life to the city. The circumstance in terms of the context of this in the fabric where the main street is really this heritage band, it doesn't look like putting some kind of retail in the bottom of the heritage school makes any sense, but it does make. And I noticed that you haven't, you kind of retained the auditorium within the complex, and I wonder whether there is some kind of community function that might be associated with, and that the kind of component that gives back in terms of something along the ground level to the community is potentially there. I think also that the general strategy of the low rise components around the edges of the site moving up towards the higher density in the site is working, is fundamentally a sensible way, and it does provide the transition between the low rise, and it starts to actually rebuild the streets around the school site to something that's more regularly a residential kind of street, and I think that's working pretty well. And the strategy that you've approached in terms of the a kind of a granularity and looking to the neighboring houses fabric for the inspiration for the massing and whatnot, I think is commendable as well. Honestly, I think that there is an opportunity for some further examination in that case and a little bit more refinement. The two-story, I find the two-story component on the perimeter, which a difference of opinion in terms of how the inside and the outside with one of the other panelists. I'm not that troubled by the internal lower facades. I think that I kind of like the way that the facade is on the inside is working in terms of the two-story. I'm not as convinced that the scale of that two-story band on the street relative to the kind of porches and the lower granular massing of the surrounding housing on the other side of the street. So I would be looking for a little bit more refinement there. I do share the concern with the central component of the complex, the three towers. I think that their position and composition massing location is really, it's protecting shadowing on the surrounding community, admittedly, but it's creating I don't feel a particularly amenable and livable construct in the middle of the complex. The buildings themselves are shadowing the main public space. I think that fundamentally the one tower that runs east-west at the south end of the site is problematic, and is the one thing that I think is frustrating some of the qualities that that are, you know, obviously aspirational in terms of the creation of the public realm. And that building, in fact, is sitting as an island in a kind of a ring of asphalt and service area. And I think that the tightness of the dimensions in that area are pretty revealing, not just in terms of the outlook between the two buildings, you know, as you go up in these towers that has been mentioned before, but also just in terms of the kind of you know, the amount of hard surface around that building and the lack of its connectivity, how people move up from, I think it's trying to remember the street to the south there that T-bones into the site, Houghton or something like that. Anyway, I mean, sorry?
Maple.
Yeah, there's Maple is along the south side of the site, but there's a street that ends in the site, and it starts with, I can't remember the name of it. It's sort of in the line with the entrance, vehicle entrance into the site off Maple.
It's Hewen.
Hewen, okay, sorry.
I think it was, yeah.
Yeah, I think at one point, I think the earlier version of this, there was an actual walkway that you could go through that building, and it's been in this latest version that you're presenting today, it's enclosed, and so the pedestrian penetration in the site is kind of frustrated from that point of view. And I think that there is an opportunity there that, and it may solve some of the issues that we've been all focusing on in terms of the shadowing and the density and tightness of the site there, that maybe that building has to be reconsidered, maybe reoriented, and opening up the site to the south, and maybe that street and the public courtyard in the middle there reaches down and all the way to Maple, and the circulation is not around the building, but maybe it's, you know, it comes up the middle, and that way you're able to continue the muse that you have and the rain gardens all the way down, and this access and circulation of vehicles is improved. I'd question, in terms of the vehicle circulation, whether you should be bringing all the you know, the three levels of parking into the site, and whether you shouldn't just have that access straight off of Maple, or, you know, before you enter the site, just to reduce the amount of traffic that you have on that internal street that you're talking about. Also, maybe even consider flipping the driveways onto Maple for the townhouse units, rather than, again, bring them in. I mean, the houses on the south side of Maple all have driveways onto the Maple. So I think that there's some re-examination that would allow better sun penetration into the central courtyard, would not interfere with the view of the escarpment further to the south of the community, who are all going to be blocked by that the mass of that east-west tower or slab. And I mean, if not that kind of an approach of breaking it up and maybe trying to open at least some view quarters through the site on axis with the main heritage axis of the school, it might even allow a relationship from the south down that Houghton Street that ends in the heritage, the north. Sorry, I always get my south side of the school, the heritage school. Yes. I think there's some opportunity there to reconsider how things are placed on the site. I would even argue, and this is why I asked, that the corner entrances are not, I mean, I understand that when the school was, people would be entering the site of the school on those corners, but that archway, I don't feel that it I think you could relocate it on the site and it would retain its, significance to the community. And you could move the townhouses there and opening a wider route up from Houghton that would allow for some kind of this kind of interconnection into the middle of the route. Or as Dana said at the beginning, just try and pull it together into less, instead of 3 towers, one or two maybe slightly taller ones would help with the simple kind of concentration and density that you have. That's, I think, problematic. It's just, I think that they're just too tight in the middle there. I don't know if there's anything else that I had a lot to say there. Sorry. I think that's all I have to add. I don't know if there's any questions from the panel today. Sorry, the presenters of our panel.
I do have just one question for you, David, or for the panel members. So I appreciate all the comments, and we're working through a couple avenues and directives on our end. The housing crisis that we're all very well aware of, and then on the site that we have the heritage component and the surrounding land uses that we're working with. But the key. The comments relating to the guideline and a 25-meter separation, is that not related to tall buildings, like the over 44? And this is a planner coming
so I
to
guess
a designer.
I mean, you have gone to the very top of the area where you would, if you went another millimeter over, then yes, you would immediately suddenly have to double your width. Now, I think that we can all see that at a sort of common sense level, that we're just talking about the livability of the circumstance here. And we're just, I mean, our advice is that this is not as, it doesn't suddenly become, less livable when you go down 1 meter below 44. I mean, it is clearly, you're like following the rules, and so okay, if we go down one, it's like you're getting around the rules, I guess, is if by going down to just below the 44 to then say, oh, then I guess we could almost touch then. That's not really a sensible approach. I think that the idea is that as you go, that there's obviously a gradient, and that they're saying as soon as you're over to 44, then you should have at least 25. Well, then that means that maybe when you go down to, just below 44, then maybe you should only have 24. And then if you go down, it's not a stepping thing. It's got to be a sloping kind of graph. So I think we're just saying you're really pushing it a bit too tight there. But that's like a symbol, or a sort of a symptom of a problem that's more than just that one thing. It's just the density of having those 3 things so tight to each other. And you can just see in your own shadow diagrams you've got your main park, your center of your complex. It gets almost no sun.
I'm just looking at it as, and as I said, I'm a planner, not an urban designer. I don't even pretend to be one. But looking at those guidelines and how if you're over 44, there's a certain floor plate and there's a certain separation, and I understand the guidelines. I just wonder, where do you apply them and where do you don't, and where you don't. And
well,
I
it's a
appreciate your
guide,
comments.
so it's as a guide, you're using it as a tool, and so you have to extrapolate it to conditions like, what does the spirit of the guide mean in this circumstance? And I think it's saying that the livability of this situation is, as you go taller, you want smaller footprints and more gap, and I don't think it just, when you drop below so close to meeting that qualification, you're sacrificing livability and quality of environment and community there when you sail so close to the limit there. So
Well,
I
thank
think
you. Yes,
we're encouraging you to try and get the density, because I think it is commendable on the route and everything, but just do it in a way that doesn't, that solves for those internal site challenges that you have.
We appreciate, David, and on behalf of the consultants and the owners, we appreciate your time and focus and comments that you've provided us.
Thank you. I think we're done.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.